This is the 250th anniversary of the United States. I wanted to do a special set of episodes where we talk about specific foods that relate to that time period that are very, very American. And today, this episode, we're talking about the Johnny cake, the journey cake, or the hoe cake. This is one of those quintessential American dishes. It's specially American. So what is a Johnny cake, a journey cake, or a hoe cake? Well, they're all similar in that they're made with cornmeal. They're all cooked either on the ashes, in a little frying pan, or possibly on a board, like a bannock board. They're all very, very simple. And there are so many different variations in the, is it thick or is it thin? Do we put maple syrup on it or other kinds of items? But essentially, they're all the same idea. And they all relate back to, number one, being made with corn, a very, very American kind of ingredient. And they relate to this idea of interacting with Native Americans early on in our history. This corn and this type of cooking, they all connect together. In fact, the Johnny cake or the journey cake really is one of those things that cement America together. The 13 colonies at the time of the Revolution were still very divergent from each other. They had very different cultures. But something like the Johnny cake or the journey cake is going to show up in each one of those places. They may have had different names for them and used them in slightly different ways, but they would have all understood exactly what it was. Why corn? That is probably one of the best questions ever. The Johnny cake, the journey cake, the hoe cake, they're all made with cornmeal, and corn is very, very important to this dish and why it's very American. Corn is one of those very American ingredients because it comes from America and because really the rest of the world was not very interested in it. We are using it for feeding animals, yes, but also for human food. We were exporting some of our corn in the time period, but other parts of the world were really only interested in it as animal food. But here we were eating it and we were using it all over the place. One of the great things about corn is it's very prolific. One little kernel of corn can create an ear of corn or multiple ears of corn, and you will get 200, 300, multiple little kernels from that single one. So as a crop, it is very prolific. You get a lot of corn from it. Now, it also grows in a lot of different places in North America. It can grow all the way down into the West Indies. It was growing in the southern colonies, the middle colonies, and the northern colonies. It's actually pretty easy to grow. So it becomes this crop that is American. We're using it for all sorts of things. Europeans would come over to North America. They would say, they're eating this corn. We don't know why. It's got a weird taste. It's hard to cook with. But here, we love it. One of the other very interesting things about corn is the milling process. How do we take care of the corn itself? Now, corn is versatile in that we can eat it while it's green. We would call that sweet corn today. They didn't necessarily call it sweet corn, but they would eat it while it was green and still soft. They would also be able to eat it while it was in its kernel form. They would create hominy from it, where they were soaking it in a lye mixture. But most of the time, they're turning it into a cornmeal, not a corn flour, interestingly enough. So something like wheat, you're going to turn into a flour. You're going to grind it all the way up into something that's very, very fine. With corn, you can do that, but it doesn't work very well like that. And so there were even instances where American soldiers during the American Revolution, they got issued corn flour and they just did not know what to do with it. It really didn't turn into anything useful at all, and they were complaining about it. Cornmeal, on the other hand, is a more coarsely ground corn. Now, this can be done in a standard water mill, windmill, or a mill that's driven by horses with stones that are grinding against each other, and a lot of corn was processed like that. But the other great thing about this is it can be ground in a very small situation. Even soldiers, given just corn on the cob like this, were able to grind it into cornmeal. They took old worn out tin canteens, they drove holes in it with nails to make it into a grater, and they rasped it against that to create their own cornmeal. And they would also, in say smaller rural settings, in poor communities and poor households, they would have a mortar and pestle made with a log that was hollowed out in the middle and another smaller log, and they would put the kernels in there and pound it into a cornmeal. So just about anybody could process their corn into cornmeal. I really wish we could get close and understand the names of Johnny Cake, Journey Cake, Hoe Cake, and some of the other names around this particular food item. But it's very difficult research to do. The first time we really hear or see in print the word Johnny Cake is an advertisement in 1739 for a piece of cooking equipment that you can use to make Johnny Cakes. And we know that this term hoe cake, another interesting name, means that in the time period they had a cooking device that kind of looked like the hoe. It wasn't necessarily a hoe. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, they're actually cooking these cakes on hoes themselves, but I think that it's a frying pan that looks a little bit like a hoe implement of the time period. See, all these things are so difficult to research. Most of the people are not saying these things out loud. They're kind of hinting around it. I had cakes made of corn or something like that. So it can be a little tricky to understand the names themselves. Does Johnny come from Journey Cake? I don't know. There are probably a dozen or 100 different stories that people tell about where these names specifically come from, but the truth is hidden in the ages. But we can still understand what's going on here. We have soldiers eating these. We even have George Washington. One of his favorite breakfasts, or his main breakfast, was something like a hoe cake that he would smother with maple syrup or something like that and enjoy every single morning. Whether he was at home or campaigning during the Revolution, that was his main breakfast. And the soldiers were eating something similar. We have this showing up in every kind of household, whether it's the poorest or the richest. So let's pick up the earliest American cookbook, the quintessential American cookbook, which is Amelia Simmons's American Cookery. And right here on page 34, we have two recipes. One that's called Johnny Cake or Hoe Cake, so she connects those two together, as well as Indian Slapjack, which is right below it. And the Johnny Cake and Hoe Cake recipe is actually two recipes in one. She gives us some variation here. Very, very simple. Scald 1 pint of milk, put to 3 pints of Indian meal. She doesn't call it cornmeal, she calls it Indian meal, which is another one of those confusing terms, and 1/2 pint of flour. Bake before the fire. So in this version, it's just the cornmeal and milk and some wheat flour, and we're baking it before the fire. So she's really kind of implying there that she's cooking it with a bannock board. It's not really cooked on a frying pan at all. Or scald with milk with 2/3 of cornmeal, or wet 2/3 with boiling water. Add salt, molasses, and shortening. Work it up with cold water into a stiff paste and bake as above. And then in the Indian Slapjacks, she does the same sort of thing here. It's Indian meal, it's got eggs and flour, and it's beat together and then baked on a griddle, or in this case, a dry frying pan. So we have all very, very similar recipes, all using cornmeal. Sometimes we add a little bit of flour. Notice what she's doing here though. You really kind of have to cook that cornmeal with the liquid for a while. If we don't do that, it doesn't release the starches and it doesn't stick together. It will just break apart and they won't be useful. Not as a journey cake, not as something that we want to be able to put in our pocket and eat a couple hours later. That's one of the great features of this, is that it's pocket food if you need it to be that. Let's start with our first recipe. We're going to do both of these variations because they are definitely different from each other. On this first one, super easy. I'm going to put in a pint of milk into our pan and start it boiling. Now, she calls for scalding this milk. Now, in the time period, they scalded their milk. Today, we don't really need to do that with our milk. And then put the Indian meal in it, or in this case, our regular cornmeal, along with our half a pint of flour. And we're going to let this cook up a little bit. Here, she just almost implies that you really aren't doing much with it. You're just kind of mixing them together, hot milk and the cornmeal. We want this to actually boil for a little bit so that it really starts to stick together. Because when we put it onto our bannock board, or our shingle in this case, we want it to stick. Once our cornmeal and flour here have really absorbed some of this milk and thickened up, we're gonna take this and we're gonna basically make it up into little cakes, little patties. I'm gonna put it on this board and put it by the fire, and we're gonna experiment and see how it bakes by the fire. And if we're careful with this, we could peel it off the board and kind of cook the back side, but generally with these, you're just basically cooking one side of it. Now let's go for this other version. We can use milk or we can use water. We're gonna go ahead and just use water. We're gonna take our Indian meal and we're gonna put it into our boiling water. We are gonna add a little bit of salt. We're gonna add a little molasses and some butter. And this is definitely gonna change the texture. The molasses will really help cement this together, sort of like adding eggs to our pancakes. In this case, I'm gonna go ahead and just cook these in a fry pan. This is very, very similar technique here, but we have a little bit more control. If we're using a little frying pan, just like she calls for in the slapjacks, we can cook both sides, and this will probably be better for the Johnny cake or the journey cake that we're going to put in our pocket. Our Johnny cakes are off the fire, and I peeled the ones off the bannock board, and I don't know about bannock board cooking. I haven't done it a ton, and it didn't really cook a lot on the backside. They're all right, but And then the second version here I did in the frying pan, like she was suggesting with the Indian slapjacks, that you do it with a really dry pan, which worked out really well. Again, these would work as something that you would take traveling with you if you needed to do that. Soldiers could easily make something like this. This version is the super simple. It's basically the cornmeal and a little bit of flour to help hold it together, and that's it. Doesn't have salt or anything. So a lot like the ash cake, where you do the same thing, not on the bannock board, but actually just cook it right on the coals. So you bring some coals out and just put it right on the coals. You can certainly do that with these. Let's give this style, the simple style that was on the bannock board, a quick try. Some really good texture. Just the baking it by the fire and a little bit of blackness actually gives you a little bit of salt flavor itself. Now that was the ultra simple version. This one has the salt in it. These have the molasses in it to help hold it together. And I did not boil these nearly as much. In fact, I just poured the boiling water onto the meal, which is what the directions called for. I wanted to see what the difference was in how these cooked up, and these held together perfectly. They look really good. I think the molasses really does kind of glue everything together, so let's give it a try. Definitely a whole different flavor, a little bit of molasses flavory there, not very much. I didn't add a ton for the amount of meal that we had to work with, but it certainly changes the texture, and they worked out really well. The salt adds a lot. These, especially with a topping, would make something that was basically a dessert really, really good. I really want to thank Barnes Farms and Mill for supplying some of the cornmeal we used in this episode today. I really do want to encourage people that are interested in the history of the United States, the 250th. This is one of those quintessential dishes from the time period. It's still popular in some regions today, but you should try these out. Anyone can make them, anyone can get these materials, and it connects us directly with our ancestors of 250 years ago.